Hey, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am looking a little different than Kyle this week. Quick introduction. My name is Meg. I have been kind of working with the IOCDF. I've been going to conferences and involved in the IOCDF since I was 6 years old. I was diagnosed with OCD and PANDAS when I was 6. That's kind of the life story. In college, I majored in psychology, graduated this past May, and now I'm working down in Houston doing more OCD research, and eventually, hopefully, will get my degree in clinical psychology. So that's just a quick little background on me. John, any updates from you?
Yeah, so first of all, you didn't just graduate from any university, did
I graduated from UNC.
you? Meg graduated from UNC, and you didn't just work with any lab or anyone to learn about research in OCD.
Yes, I actually went into college with one goal, and that was to work with John. So I started her.
Meeting you the summer, it was, I guess, the IOCDF conference, the summer before you came to UNC. I guess you had been accepted and you were coming. And actually, you know what? I think I might have met you the summer before you applied, even.
I was prepared,
You were preparing. That's right.
thinking
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. And you're like, I can count on one. I've worked with like hundreds of undergraduates, and I can count on one hand the number who like contacted me, who got to know me before they even came to college saying, I want to do OCD research. I want to be in your lab. And you're one of them and the best out of all of them. But then you
Thank
spent
you.
4 years working in my lab and did all sorts of awesome stuff there. And now you are like on your way to becoming a professional. And for people like me, there's no greater joy than to see their students like go off and do wonderful things. So
Yeah, hopefully at least.
yeah, well, right. Don't screw this up. But you're off to you're on a great track so far. I'm Jonathan Abramowitz. I am a professor at the University of North Carolina. I'm a clinical psychologist. I study OCD. I work with folks who have OCD in clinical treatment, and have been a member of the IOCDF since, wow, a long time, at least 20 years or so. And I feel like I've known you, Meg, since for years and years because I have.
I've been terrorizing the conferences for a very long time.
Yeah. Now we're going to terrorize this roundtable. But before we do that, I have some announcements. Or no, you have some announcements. You're doing the
I
announcements.
do. A couple disclaimers to get us started. This live stream is for educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. So you can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. So if you are in crisis or you ever feel suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can just do that by dialing 988, and you can also access that online at 988lifeline.org. Last thing, we want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And note that this is being broadcasted on several social media platforms and is being recorded.
And I just want to add a special announcement, particularly for now, for this month. The IOCDF has kicked off fundraising for the research grant program. And 100% of the donations received will support next year's research grant awards that fund studies that further our understanding of the causes and treatments of OCD and related disorders. So you can go to iocdf.org/donate-research, iocdf.org/donate-research. Such a wonderful program that the IOCDF has. I and my students have been the recipient of these awards, as have many folks, and it has led to some terrific research in the area of OCD. So go ahead, take it away. We're going to talk about our topic of today's.
Let's get started. So happy OCD week. The theme for this week is mythbusting, and kind of talking about what maybe misconceptions there are of OCD, things that a lot of people believe about OCD that maybe aren't true. So I have a list here, and John, if it works for you, I'll kind of just read the first one, and then we can chat about it, what's maybe true about it, what isn't. So the first one we have here is that OCD is just about being clean and organized. If you have OCD, you're a very neat person that maybe washes your hands a lot.
No, that is not true. There are some people for whom OCD affects them in that way, but that's only one part of or one presentation, one manifestation of OCD, of course, right? People can have fears about responsibility for causing harm to other people, or what if I have some sort of thought about something that's so anti who I am, what if I harm someone or have sex with someone or something that I'm not really interested in? Religion plays a part in OCD sometime. Symmetry and order. I'm probably missing relationships. I'm probably missing a lot of stuff, but that's just one aspect of OCD.
Yeah, I think that it's totally possible to need things to be neat or want to be clean, but there's a lot else that people don't talk about. Next myth. OCD is just a minor personality quirk. Maybe it's actually just a positive thing about your personality that makes you better at school, more organized, things like that.
Again, no. Yeah, OCD, and sometimes in the popular media, you see somebody is taking advantage of their OCD and putting it to good use and stuff like that. But it's not a good thing, and it's not just a personality quirk. This is a serious mental health problem, disorder, psychiatric disorder, and it's something that for many people interferes greatly with their functioning, with their happiness, with their ability to have relationships, jobs, school, all sorts of stuff. So it is much more than a personality quirk.
Yeah, I think a big one that comes with this myth is the I'm so OCD. And I think if you are really OCD and that's something you're saying, then that's okay. But I think it's hard as a person with OCD, and I know in the community hearing other people say that, to remember that just because you're neat doesn't mean that you have OCD.
Yeah. It's good that people are aware that OCD is a thing, because for many years they weren't, right? But we want to educate them to know what it really is, and that it is a serious problem, and certainly not something to be made light of, or to just kind of, oh, you're OCD because you do this. People do that a lot with things like ADD and stuff like that as well, which is incorrect.
Absolutely. I think this next myth is an interesting one and really important, that compulsions are always physical.
Yeah, and that's not true too. We know that people have mental rituals that they're doing exclusively in their mind. And these can be long drawn out, like I have to say certain prayers in a certain way or think about certain things in a certain way. But they can also be really quick mental rituals where they're trying to remember something or say a quick word in their mind to counteract another, some sort of obsessional thought. But yeah, it's a mistake to think that compulsions are only just observable behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a big part of people kind of being misdiagnosed or not being diagnosed for a long time comes from, is that they aren't aware that the things they're doing in their head are OCD, because OCD is kind of really only painted in one light in the greater community.
Yeah, that's a great point. In order to do successful treatment, we need to know about all of the person's compulsions, rituals. And so it's important to teach folks that it's not just overt behavioral observable things, but people often do compulsions, cognitively in their mind.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Next myth, people with OCD want to be compulsing. It's something that is helpful to their day-to-day.
Yeah, also not true. People with OCD generally try to fight their compulsions. They wish that they didn't have to do them. People vary in how strongly they have the urge to do their compulsions, their rituals, and they might vary in terms of how much they believe that those compulsions actually protect them or other people from harm. But all things being equal, they would rather not have to deal with doing their compulsions at all if they had their choice. Now, one thing, there is another psychiatric diagnosis that's called obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And I always thought that it's a shame that those two have such similar names, because in OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, the person does kind of take pride in how compulsive they are and their compulsive behaviors. And it's kind of like, I have to do things a certain way and I like it that way, and you should also be doing it this way. And it's more about doing those behaviors to try, as we were talking about before, to have things orderly and neat. And the person likes that. The person, feels like it's my way or the highway. In OCD, right, it's very different. The person wishes that they didn't have to feel that way. They try to resist doing those compulsions when they come up.
Yeah, and I think that ties really well into our kind of next two myths, which are also not true, but I think are widely often believed by the public, is that one, OCD is a superpower, and two, that OCD is just a sign of greater intelligence.
Yeah. So you might be able to speak to it better than I can. I don't have OCD. I don't look at it as a superpower. I look at it as something that we probably would like to get rid of, right? It's something that gets in the way. Again, I can see from especially some of the topics, the myths that we've already discussed, that for some people it might be seen like, I clean my house so well because I have OCD, that's my superpower. Again, I think that's kind of disparaging to people that have OCD, but I don't know, what would you say? Is it a superpower, Meg?
From my experience of living with OCD and living without OCD, I for sure enjoy my life without OCD a significant amount more than with. I understand from a kind of thought perspective of, I was so focused on so many different things at the time that now I wouldn't even sit in my head for a second. I see how it can be perceived as something that might be a superpower. I did feel like my senses were on a much more high alert than they are now. But that wasn't something that I enjoyed. It made my life way harder than it is now. So no, I would not say it felt like a superpower.
Yeah, it'd be easier to live without it.
Exactly.
Sure. What about the issue of it giving people greater intelligence? I have some thoughts about that, but I don't know. Do you want to?
I think that also comes with kind of what I said about thoughts. I think, and also there's a lot of research that can come with obsessions. For me, I was researching germs, bacteria, ways to wash your hands, like high-powered soaps. So yes, there are maybe things that people with OCD know that people without OCD might not know. But from an intelligence perspective, I personally don't feel like it influenced my intelligence in any way.
I think that you have to have a certain amount of intelligence to have OCD.
I agree.
You know what I mean? Like, only smart people and creative people, I think, have that sense of imagination that can lead to obsessions and can sometimes lead you to get lost in your imagination and that kind of creative thinking, and being able to think about all the different possibilities, which again, it can be that can be a curse, but it comes from being smart. I mean, dumb people don't think that hard about the kinds of things that people with OCD think about, is my sense of just observing lots of people with OCD.
I agree with that. I think I was one of the only 3-year-olds who was touching a piece of gum with my toe, and then my toe touching my knee and my hand touching my knee, and that meant that the germ was now on my hand. I mean, I don't know how many 3-year-olds are really going through that elevated of a thought process.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Kind of switching gears, next myth, and I hate this one, is that OCD is just a product of bad parenting.
Yeah. No, that is certainly not true. OCD is not a product of any one thing. Any one thing, whether it's environment or biology, there is no evidence that there is one thing that causes OCD. Whatever causes OCD, and let me say very clearly, we don't know what causes OCD. It's a complex mixture of different factors, some of them biological, some of them learning and the environment. But whatever that is, it's just not one thing, and it is certainly not worth blaming, OCD on one particular thing, as if this didn't happen, you wouldn't have OCD. it's just more nuanced than that. It's so complex.
Yeah, and I think an important topic to kind of talk about when talking about parenting and OCD is family accommodation and kind of what comes with that. And I can completely understand parents blaming themselves when their child gets into treatment and you learn all the ways you were accommodating your child because duh, if your kid was washing their hands all the time, you were going to replenish the soap, you were going to clean the towels, you were going to make sure their clothes were clean. There's nothing wrong with helping your kid before you knew what it was and what the treatment was. So not blaming yourself for that either, I think is important to mention.
Great point. And just because, as a parent, if you're the parent of someone with OCD, or if you have OCD, just because we don't know the cause and just because a certain type of parenting is not the cause of OCD doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it by changing, like you're talking about, by changing the way that we parent or by changing our behavior. We know that we can, in fact, change behavior, and that can help reduce OCD symptoms. But that doesn't mean that that's the cause of the problem in the first place.
Absolutely. This next one I think is very interesting for people with OCD. And it's that every thought I have is meaningful or should be taken seriously, with a lot of thought.
Yeah. So for folks who have OCD, very often their OCD kind of tricks them into thinking that. That's sometimes we call that thought action fusion. It's this kind of overvaluing of thoughts. But that's the myth is just that. It's a myth. Human beings, I think I read somewhere, we have something like 5,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot of thoughts, and not all of them are true, worthwhile, factual. And for folks that have OCD, for most people with OCD, they have a mistake that they make where they take their intrusive thoughts that are meaningless, that are just products of their imagination, and they interpret them as true, as facts. They treat them as if they're actual facts. But that's not true. We all, everyone, whether they have OCD or not, thinks about all sorts of stuff that's sometimes not true, and sometimes the antithesis of who you are. I don't have OCD, but if I told you about the kinds of thoughts that sometimes go through my head, like, you wouldn't want anything to do with me because I'm a human. That's what humans do. We all think about weird stuff sometimes.
I think the most memorable moment in treatment for me was when I learned that everyone has intrusive thoughts, that I'm not the only one that was thinking these horrible, scary things. I was just one of the only ones really thinking about it, and not just letting it pass me by. And obviously it's not an immediate fix learning that everyone has intrusive thoughts, but it was definitely helpful to realize that I wasn't alone and it wasn't just me.
That's great to hear. I hear that a lot from folks that I work with as well, that it's a little bit like a weight being lifted off their chest. Like, oh, you mean that there's not a problem with my brain that's giving me all these terrible thoughts, meaning there's something terribly wrong with me? No, there's not. Everybody thinks about this. The problem is how you're responding to those thoughts. That's what really matters.
Exactly. I think this next one will be really helpful kind of to hear your perspective as a clinician. And this myth is that OCD is uncurable, and that people with OCD will kind of be experiencing those symptoms and be in distress and impaired for the rest of their life.
Yeah, that's also a complex one. So I think, when we talk about curing OCD, it's not always clear what that means, because everybody has some degree of, like we've been talking about, unwanted thoughts. And everybody sometimes does, extra checking and washing and things like that. OCD is not like COVID, where, you take a medicine and then, or other, I guess COVID is not a great example, but it's not like, let's say, strep throat, right? Where strep is a bacteria, you take a antibacterial medication, antibiotics, and then you cure the strep. OCD is not like that. It exists more on a continuum, and again, it's it's very complicated. So can we make the distress associated with OCD go down? Absolutely. Can we make through therapy, can we help the impairment that's associated with OCD go away? Absolutely. But usually what happens is the person is still living with intrusive thoughts. Sometimes those thoughts come up, and sometimes, they're frequent. Again, that's because we all experience that. And sometimes they're still going to have urges to do rituals or avoid. And so it's more about how do I minimize these kinds of symptoms so that they don't bother me and so that they are not impacting my function. In other words, they're not pushing me around so much. If we want to call that a cure, okay, sure. I'm not sure the term cure really applies to OCD. But I think we're really helping people manage it. But yeah, give me your thoughts.
I was gonna say, I don't think cure honestly applies to any mental health problem. Thinking back, I just think that a big part of mental health is the life stressors that you're experiencing. And so if maybe you just got a new job, or you just moved to a new city, or you just had a baby, like there are so many different things that might make your OCD, which you hadn't experienced at all, worse for a little bit. So I don't think there's like a linear really cure to any mental health disorder, specifically OCD.
That's a great point. If people are familiar with the DSM, right, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that's kind of the Bible in mental health of like the criteria for, how do you know if someone meets the criteria for a certain disorder, right? You do a clinical interview and you kind of match up their responses to these criteria. And the criteria are, just like you're getting at, they're very subjective. So for OCD, you have to have obsessions and compulsions that take up a certain amount of time. They have to cause distress, a certain degree of distress, and they have to cause impairment. But you know what? Two people could have the same time that they're spending with obsessions and compulsions, but one might see it as very distressing. The other person might experience it as less distressing. It might interfere greatly with one person's life and not so much with the other. So it's just a matter of kind of how a person experiences their obsessions and rituals that has a lot to do with whether we consider something in remission or not. I see people are writing in nice comments in the chat about that as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of different ways to get there. This is my first time here, but as I'm sure you guys have said before, ERP is really the treatment that should work the best, but there's other things to do as well. There's medication. There are people who are in ERP therapy long-term with their OCD. There's people who do it for a couple years and then they have that toolbox from treatment and kind of self-treat on their own when those flare-ups happen. So I think it's not just one linear kind of road of recovery. There's lots of different ways that people go about it.
Truth.
Next question in kind of similarity to this is that people with OCD have no control over their compulsions. They just kind of happen.
Not true. In general. Now, sometimes people have like automatic rituals that they do without really thinking about it, but we can help folks who have those kinds of rituals to be able to recognize when they're happening and to be able to reduce them. That doesn't mean that it's easy, but people can stop their rituals when they learn techniques for how to do that. The problem is it's really unpleasant to do that. It's scary. It can feel really distressing because what those rituals mean, right? The purpose of those rituals for a person with OCD is to reduce their distress, to keep them feeling like they're safe. And so if you stop doing that, you're going to have distress. You're going to feel like you're not safe. That doesn't mean the person can't do it. It's that it's really unpleasant to do that. And so the person decides, well, I don't want to do that. But physically, it is possible, absolutely, to stop doing rituals. It's not like people with OCD are automatons that, have no control over their behavior. Human beings have control over their behavior.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing, and I think you kind of touched on this, is In treatment, especially at the start, it's interesting to kind of realize, I think in the beginning, it really is possible to be doing compulsions that you're not really realizing or were your way of like mitigating or reducing that anxiety. And then even as you progress in treatment years down the road, one day your therapist might be like, do you think that's a compulsion? And I think it's totally possible to not realize it. But once you've realized it, it's absolutely controllable. It could be hard, but you can do it.
And that's the point, right? It's sometimes they're happening, they're not uncontrollable or automatic. They're just out of the person's awareness. And like you said, once you learn how to be aware of it, you can, then you can bring it under your control.
Absolutely. This next myth I think is really interesting is that OCD is rare.
No, as mental health conditions go, it's not rare. What are the latest? Like somewhere between 1% and 3% of the population. You might look at that, you might say, well, that's 1% or 3%, that's rare. But if you look at what's the population of the US is like 300 million people. So, we're talking about millions of people that have OCD. So I wouldn't call it rare. There are other psychiatric disorders that are rarer. Schizophrenia, for example, is rare. And then there are others that are more common, like substance use, social anxiety are more common than OCD. But we think of OCD as being one of the more common mental health disorders that are out there.
Absolutely. And I think that doesn't speak to like severity. There are people who might experience OCD for a couple years, get treatment, kind of move on. There's people that it's a lifelong debilitating kind of mental illness. But I agree. It's definitely more common than people think. Next one, similar, is that everybody is just a little bit OCD.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Again, like I said before, I think that these behaviors of having obsessions and compulsions, these experiences, they do occur on a continuum. And so like there's the Y box, the Yale Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale, and there's the Obsessive Compulsive Inventory and the Dimensional Obsessive. There are all these measures that assess OCD symptoms. And if you give them to the general population, most people will not have a 0 on those. Most people will have, some of those symptoms. The difference being that for folks who have diagnosable OCD, these obsessions and compulsions are much more frequent. They're much more interfering with functioning. They take up more time. They cause more distress. So in that way, I think that there is a cutoff between folks that are diagnosed with OCD and folks without. But I do think that it's possible for folks who don't have OCD to have some of the same experiences in a qualitative way, but not in a quantitative way.
I agree. And I think that everyone is a little anxious, especially in this day and age. Everyone is going to experience some sort of anxiety. And if they do something to mitigate that anxiety, I think that's really just a human response. I don't think that maybe should be conceptualized as a compulsion right away. It really does, like you said, depend on the distress that they're experiencing.
Yeah, exactly.
Next myth, I really wish this was true. OCD can be cured if you just avoid your triggers, if you just don't go anywhere near the germs.
Yeah, no. You make OCD worse if you do that, because invariably you're not going to be able to avoid that. Something's going to come up. I've worked with lots of folks in my practice who are like, well, if I think you mentioned this before, if I just move from my house, then my OCD will go away. I won't have to worry about it anymore. Or if I just manipulate my environment so that I don't have to do X, Y, or Z, then everything will be fine. And maybe that works temporarily. They go through, life and things seem to be okay. But then, boy, something invariably is going to happen that they didn't expect. And they're still going to have their obsessional fears, their compulsive rituals. So that is not a good way to manage OCD. And the treatments you were mentioning before, exposure and response prevention, that treatment is based on the exact opposite idea that in order to get over our problems with fear and obsessions, we actually need to lean into them and kind of expose them for the fallacies that they are, for the for the imagery and imaginations that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, if I could have just avoided all of my triggers and all of my fears, yeah, treatment would have been really easy. But I think the point of treatment that people that believe that are maybe forgetting is that it's to get back to your regular life and to be able to enjoy whatever life throws at you. And for me, like if I just continued to avoid and not gone anywhere near germs, I wouldn't have gone to college. I mean, that there are a lot of germs at college. And so that to me would not have been the fullest way to live my life if I had just continued avoiding.
There are a lot of germs at college. What a great thing. But it's true. And right, and you bring up another point, which is that you can try to reduce your anxiety and reduce your compulsions by avoiding, but at what cost, right? You're going to barricade yourself in your house, or you're not going to go to college because of the germs. That's just not a good way to live. And some people do try to do that and they get other people on board. You mentioned accommodation earlier. Well, go buy this for me, go get me this, go bring me that. And that might make things easier for you if you have OCD, but it's not going to make things easier for those around you. And sooner or later, that's going to come back to haunt you as well.
Yeah, and I think it's easy when you're experiencing OCD to look at the life you would have had or the life you could have and not want it because you're so scared of the things that might come with it. But as someone who's kind of been on both sides, the treatment is absolutely worth it. It is, in my opinion, easier by the end than it seemed at the beginning.
That's such an important thing for people to hear. And it's, I mean, just in my experience as a clinician, people come in and, no one is all that excited about doing something as challenging as exposure and response prevention. But afterwards, they say, many of them, not everybody, but they often say the same thing that you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the point of kind of ranking what each exposure would be for you on a scale of 1 to 100. Eating a piece of pizza off a toilet would have been 150 for me at the beginning of treatment, but I did it and had no problem by the end.
Okay.
Yeah. That was one of the IOCDF conference, the scavenger hunts. As a kid, we all had to eat dinner in the bathroom.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, good for you.
I tell myself that they cleaned the bathroom before we went in for like sanitary reasons, but really, who knows? So.
More power to you. You survived. You're still here.
Exactly. I'm here to tell the story.
You're here to tell the story.
This next one makes me mad. People with OCD just need to be more relaxed.
Yeah, that's awful and a terrible thing to say to anyone who has any sort of anxiety or any sort of mental health disorder, or even someone who doesn't have a mental disorder who's just really upset. That's just disparaging. If people could be less anxious, they would do that. And so just kind of saying just relax, assumes a lot of things. And when you have a problem that's as serious and as real as OCD, it's not a matter of just relaxing. People often need professional help to be able to. And it's not just about relaxing, because no one's relaxed all the time. But right? But it's about how am I open to anxiety, distress, obsessions, and how do I operate in my life despite the fact that sometimes I'm going to experience those things. Hopefully there's more relaxation, but life is not just about being relaxed all the time.
Yeah, I can assure you I was not engaging in obsessions and compulsions because they were fun. If I could have just relaxed, I would have. And John, I think something you just said relates really well to something someone said in the chat that I just wanted to mention, which is that remission doesn't just mean that you're free of OCD, you don't have those thoughts anymore. It's living life in spite of OCD. So you might still be having those thoughts, but you're doing the things that scare you anyways.
Yeah, I see that comment, and the one from Amy also at 1234. It's living life according to my values and not just OCD's rules, not getting pushed around by that anxiety and that uncertainty and the distressing thoughts and things like that. That's a great way to sum up the goal of treatment for OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a great point. This next one, I'm really interested to hear your opinion, and that's if you read about an OCD subtype or you have friends with OCD and you hear about their OCD, that you will then have that OCD subtype or that fear.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that for some people that I have seen that happen. I don't think it's a common thing, but I have seen where people with OCD, remember OCD involves a certain vulnerability to not being able to see thoughts for what they really are. And so if I start to think about something, if I have OCD, it's at least some manifestations of OCD. If I start to have intrusive thoughts about something bad, anything bad, I might start to think, oh no, what if that happened to me? What if I did that? What if it happened to someone that I love? And so you do see instances where someone didn't have an obsession about something, and then they started to, they heard about it on the news, or they read about it, or someone told them about it, and they did start to develop obsessions about that. It's not something that happens every day, but that can happen, actually. That doesn't mean you should avoid those things, because as we were just talking about, Meg, avoidance is no way to manage OCD. But what you want to do is you want to get to the least common denominator, which is not that I'm afraid of this thought specifically or this situation specifically. It's more this process of misinterpreting, intrusive thoughts about bad stuff, taking what's in your imagination at face value, as opposed to kind of, looking at the facts and what's coming through your senses about who you are and things like that. So we want to teach people how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that it's not 100% untrue, that if you hear about or you have a friend with OCD because I remember as a kid hearing my friends' OCD thoughts or obsessions and being like, you make a good point. And I think that that's totally understandable, but it's nowhere near as common as one might think, just thinking about kind of people with OCD interacting. I think having friends, at least for me, that had OCD at the time that I was really struggling was one of the most helpful things I could have experienced, because a big part of my OCD was just, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I thinking this way? Why am I so anxious all the time? And seeing people that were having the same experiences and knowing that it wasn't just me was really helpful.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, next one. Let's see, where are we? People with OCD truly believe their obsessions or find them rational.
Good question. And that's also a myth. There is a range of what we in the business we call an insight into kind of the senselessness of obsessions and rituals, and that there's a continuum there too. So you have some folks with OCD who really do believe, really strongly, like let's just take your example, if I ate pizza off of a toilet, that I really will get sick, and there's pretty much nothing you can do to convince me otherwise. That's just what I believe. And there's a range from really strong belief all the way down to, nah, that's probably not going to happen, but I don't want to take the chance, right? So I better avoid it, or I better wash, or I need to just not take chances. Most folks, it turns out, with OCD are kind of more towards the middle of that continuum, leaning towards not believing that it's true, but just kind of wanting to be on the safe side. It's a smaller percentage of folks that really strongly believe that their obsessions are true.
Yeah, I think that I just don't want to take the chance is a really good way to phrase it. I was fully aware that my thoughts were irrational, but who knows, like every once in a while, the story I always tell is I had this fear that a tree would land on my house and would kill my parents and I would be an orphan.
Wow.
And it was dark. And during big storms, I would stand and I would watch the tree sway back and forth. I'm from North Carolina. We have big pine trees. And then one day the tree fell.
And we have big storms too.
See, Mom,
yeah, right.
I was right. The tree did fall, but the tree didn't fall on our house. So every once in a while, like absolutely, if you have fears of getting the flu, of throwing up, that's a human experience. It's going to happen. But it's the level at which people with OCD, like washing your hands 50 to 100 times a day, for me at least, like that was where I knew it was irrational. But again, I was like, I want the anxiety to decrease. I don't want to take the chance. So I was doing it anyways.
Yeah, there is you reminded me of something. In my clinical work, I will often ask people who seem to kind of strongly believe that their obsessions are true. I'll ask them, I'll give them a test that I call the life savings wager, which is basically the idea. So again, let's say pizza toilet, right? Let's say that scenario, and the person's terrified of that. And I might say to the person, hey, let's make a bet. If you were to eat this pizza off the toilet, if you get sick, you get to keep your life savings. But if you don't get sick from doing it, I get everything you own. Would you take that bet? And invariably they say, no way. Like knee-jerk reaction, no way. And I'll ask, well, why not? And they'll say, well, because I'm probably not going to get sick. Right? It would be a stupid bet because they're right. You probably won't get sick if you ate pizza off a toilet, generally speaking. But people usually give the correct answer. People usually will not take the bet because at some level they recognize, yeah, these ideas are exaggerated. I don't have to worry about this as much. But at the same time, I want to be on the safe side. I don't want to leave anything to chance, which is a big part of OCD. I don't want to leave anything to chance.
Yeah, and I think this was related to the chance part, is just wanting to reduce the anxiety. I think when you get stuck in like the OCD cycle, your anxiety just keeps getting worse and worse. And it's not even about the fear at some point. It's just about trying to reduce that anxiety associated with the fear. And if that meant that I was going to wash my hands 100 to 150 times a day, that was worth it to me to stop feeling the anxiety. But as most of us probably know, I only stopped feeling the anxiety for about 8 seconds, and then I had to go wash my hands again.
Meg, you are such a great spokesperson for this. You're so, the way you articulate your experience with all this is just so helpful, and I'm just really grateful, that you're doing this kind of stuff and being an advocate and being involved in the IOCDF, because you really do such a great job of describing your experience, describing treatment, and just, I don't know, I'm just really impressed with the way, I always have been, but
Thank you.
It's coming out today, just the way you articulate all this stuff. So you're a gem. You're a gem.
Well, next question, and I'm annoyed because I had written this one down to bring up after Kyle's pre-planned questions, but he actually had already thought of it, so not an original thought by me, is that all SSRIs are the same. Just take the Prozac or the Zoloft and boom, you're cured.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It would be nice if it did.
Fingers crossed one day, but we are not there medically yet.
We are not there. For some people, they swear by SSRIs and they take it and it helps them, and that's wonderful. Other people, it doesn't touch their OCD. I would say that most people are probably somewhere, again, continuum, somewhere in the middle. Maybe they get some benefit. For some people, they have really bad side effects from these medicines. Other people, they don't have any side effects. We're all, the medicines are, so everybody who takes, let's just take Prozac, right? Everybody who takes Prozac, they're all getting the same thing. They're putting the same thing inside their body, except everybody's bodies are different. We all look different on the outside. We all are built, slightly differently on the inside. Our metabolism is faster than others, and the way that our enzymes break down the drug is faster than others. And so, the drug, one drug in particular might be one size fits all, but our bodies are not one size. Then you have Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft. So these are all SSRIs. They're all put out by different drug companies, so they all have to be slightly different. I am not one who really understands the details of all these, differences. And these medicines seem to have more in common than they have different, but they're not exactly the same thing. And some of them have different side effect profiles. Some people will swear by, this SSRI worked for me, but this one didn't. And, people have their own experience. But yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I will mention as well, that just to make it a little more complicated, there's all these different types of medications. There's also different doses.
Oh, yeah, right.
So who knows kind of how your body reacts to a low dose, a high dose. There's some people that react really strongly to a low dose. There's some people that might be on 300 milligrams of another dose. So it really is, who knows? And unfortunately, that's what psychiatrists are for. And they're experienced. So usually they can help, but there is some trial and error for sure. There was one question in the chat, John, that I thought you might be able to answer, and that is, how do you distinguish a phobia from OCD?
I love it. Yeah, I saw that too. Well, so I'm going to give you a simple answer, and then because I'm a nerd, I'm going to go into more details about it. The simple answer is that when you have a phobia, there are usually specific things that the person is afraid of, and they do a lot of avoidance of those things. And it, it usually is, about animals or certain situations like heights or storms, or it can be about certain environmental situations like the dark or, I don't know. Yeah. So very specific types of situations that don't usually kind of switch. It's usually really specific. But the thing is, so that's the easy, and OCD, of course, people have those kinds of fears too, but then they engage in compulsive rituals. And in OCD, the fear usually stays similar, but it can kind of switch up a little bit, to some degree. It's more for some people than others, but rituals are a thing in OCD and they're not a thing in phobias. So that's kind of the very simplistic, again, I'm referring to that DSM book. Again, if you look it up, the criteria, right, for one versus the other. But there's a lot of similarities between them. Both of these problems involve anxiety, fear. They both involve that fight or flight response. People with phobias sometimes do have rituals. It's just not something that's as recognized, and they might not be as ritualistic as folks with OCD. People with OCD often have very specific fears, and they often avoid them. So there's a lot of overlap, and I think that these two problems in one way or another are related. It's just that the DSM kind of draws the line at one has compulsions, the other doesn't. Again, we could have a whole nother research roundtable on like some of the problems, and we should, some of the problems with the DSM and what are the boundaries of OCD, and is it discrete from these other problems, or is it more of like, do they kind of mix together? What are the boundaries, I guess? I don't know. That's what I was saying. My long-winded answer.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about myself this whole time. Sorry to keep talking about myself. And I know we say in the beginning, like, OCD isn't just cleanliness and fear of germs, but that was my big thing. So that's the example I'm going to use. I did have a phobia of throwing up, like 100%. That was why I engaged in every single compulsion, but it was 100% OCD that was driving what I was doing about that phobia of throwing up. And I also had pretty much every other type of OCD in the book. This was just the main one. But I was thinking about it the whole time because I think it's interesting. I really do feel like I had a phobia. But like I said, it was definitely OCD that was happening.
Yeah, it just depends on the lens that you're looking at it through, which, again, is our problem. We were talking about this before. It's a problem with the nomenclature, which is kind of, that refers to how we classify mental health problems, psychiatric disorders. It's complicated. It's not always cut and dry. It's rarely cut and dry, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. On to the last question, which is,
where's Kyle? Kyle never showed up.
I know, right? I've been wondering.
That's all right.
He's taking that test. He's working hard.
We're doing okay. Maybe we'll have you, and maybe you can replace him in the future. No, I'm kidding. Kyle, if you're listening, we love you. We miss you. But
join us.
And join us. Yeah.
Last one is that OCD is just a phase, and that it will just go away with time.
Yeah, that is not true. OCD is anything but a phase. It is a disorder. It is a real thing. That said, we know that if you follow people over the course of having OCD, over the years that they might have it, it does. Sometimes it gets worse. Sometimes it gets less severe. And we understand that there are some factors that are associated with that. When a person has more stress, they're more likely to have more OCD symptoms. So we say that it waxes and wanes, but it is certainly not a phase. It's not something that we just say, oh, that'll pass, or and you certainly would never say to someone, oh, you're just going through a phase. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a really good example of that, at least from like a kid perspective, is summer. I think a lot of, and not to say that you can't be anxious in the summer, but a lot of OCD and anxiety for kids is related to school.
Yeah.
And then they get to the summer and the parents are like, well, you're cured, like you're good to go. And then the first day of school rolls around and you're back to OCD. That doesn't mean that it was just a phase or that it's this phase that like goes back and forth. It kind of just means, well, you were able to avoid your triggers. It wasn't an intentional avoidance, but it was just environmental.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, do you have any other myths we haven't mentioned? Anything that you want to bust?
Yeah, you know what? Let me think about that for a second. And while I'm doing that, if folks who are tuned in have more questions or other things that have myths they want to bust, feel free to write in as well. We're looking at the chat. I am trying to think of ones that have come up for me. I think another one that comes up for me a lot that people ask me about is, do people with OCD, like, is there something wrong with their brain? Do they have a broken brain? Is there something with their serotonin or their brain structure functioning and things like that? And I would say that, again, that's something that requires more research. We have these really fancy imaging studies, right, where we take, let's say, 100 people with OCD and 100 people without OCD, and we scan their brains, and lo and behold, and not surprisingly, if you ask me, the people with OCD, their brains are lighting up, right? They show different signals and different things going on, different processing than people without OCD. Now, I said that's not surprising to me because it doesn't take a genius to know that someone with OCD, of course, their brains are doing, when you're anxious, your brains are doing, more things. When, as you were describing, Meg, you got to keep track of all these things that might be dangerous. Your brain is doing something different than a person with OCD. So it's not surprising that would show up on some sort of imaging scan. It's fascinating. It's very interesting, but I'm not sure that means that there's something broken about the brain that then leads to OCD. What we have from these kinds of studies is that it's merely a correlation. There's a relationship between certain patterns of brain activity and having OCD. And what's really fascinating is that studies have been done. These are called symptom provocation studies. When you take people who don't have OCD, and half of them, you make them think about unpleasant stuff, make them anxious, and then you scan them, and they show very similar brain activity to people who have OCD. And what that suggests is that perhaps it's the anxiety and it's having OCD that actually changes what's going on in the brain. And that's when you have, this from going to being a psych major at UNC, when you have a correlation, there's a relationship between brain activity and OCD, you cannot infer causation. You can't say that one causes the other. So again, I say that the jury is still out. It's certainly fascinating to see what parts of the brain are involved in OCD, but to say that people with OCD have broken brains, I think is a stretch. And I think there are plenty of folks with OCD who function very, very highly in other areas of their life that are unaffected by OCD. And so if there was a big time brain disturbance in OCD, the OCD would not be the only thing that's affected by that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just unfortunately, I think there just needs to be more research done. I agree. There's definitely going to be some sort of difference in a healthy control in a person with OCD when you're looking in their brain because you were thinking about such greatly different things. But do they have broken brains? No. And I think then you have to bring in the whole talk of genetics. And there was a comment here I saw that maybe this is the next myth we want to bust or chat about, is that nurture does directly affect OCD more than other disorders. I think that is an interesting comment as well. John,
Yeah.
if you have thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I think nurture is absolutely involved in OCD, but not as the cause of OCD. If you're gonna get OCD, nurture may or may not be involved in a complex way. But what we do know is that nurture can impact how the expression of OCD is. And the best example of that is the way that religion can impact OCD. Now, being religious does not cause you to have OCD. How do I know that? Well, the vast majority of people who are religious don't have OCD. So if religion caused OCD, then everyone who is religious would also have OCD. That's not the way that it goes. But we know that religion impacts the type of obsessions and compulsions that you have. So if you have, if you're Jewish and you have OCD that happens to attack your maybe scrupulosity, right? Jewish people with OCD, they worry about stuff that's related to being Jewish, like keeping the laws of kosher, right? Eating certain dietary restrictions, or there are certain days of the year that you fast in the Jewish religion, and OCD can affect, what if I swallowed too much saliva during Yom Kippur, which is a Jewish fast day? But if you're Catholic, you wouldn't worry about keeping kosher, right? But you would worry about, did my confession work enough, right? Or did I have some sort of unwanted thought that's, a sin based on Catholicism? And if you're Protestant, Christian, or if you're Muslim, right? Or if you're LDS, Mormon, the religious cultural background that you grow up in absolutely affects the manifestation of OCD, but doesn't cause it. So I want to be really clear about that.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And I think even beyond scrupulosity, it's really just the things you hear, especially from the perspective of someone who had OCD as a kid. The things you hear from adults, I really just took as fact. And that's not the adult's fault, but the way my brain worked, because I had OCD, not because of my parents, but just because I did. I'll never forget, my babysitter told me that you shouldn't wash your hands so often. Washing your hands will kill the good bacteria. And that sent me down a whole spiral of, well, if I wash my hands, I'll kill the good bacteria. But if I don't wash my hands, then I won't kill the bad bacteria. That was a lot for me to handle. And that wasn't anyone's fault. But because someone said that to me, that influenced my OCD for like 5 years later. That was something I thought about all the time. So it's really what just sticks in your brain. And like you said, your cultural environmental experiences.
Absolutely, yeah. Those things they can't. I mean, they influence so much of what we do. Why wouldn't they influence OCD as well?
Exactly. Yeah.
There was another one. I know we're getting to the end of time here, but there was another question. Oh boy, back up a little ways. Oh, is it an overstatement to say that ERP is the only effective treatment? And again, that's kind of a complicated one. ERP, exposure and response prevention, is the most well-studied treatment for OCD. And it's been around since the 1950s, and the first studies came up in the 1960s. And so that we're talking 50, 60, years ago, 70 years ago. It's been studied in labs around the world. It's studied in clinics around the world. Every continent except Antarctica has research coming out, on the efficacy of exposure and response prevention. We know it works. We understand why it works. It's not a panacea. It doesn't work, for everyone. There are other approaches that are, out there as well that have some research. Acceptance and commitment therapy, inference-based behavior therapy are the ones that are coming to mind. Dialectical behavior therapy, they're some of the ones that are coming to mind for me now. And these can be helpful, and there is evidence for all of those that they can be helpful. They haven't been studied as rigorously or for as long as exposure and response prevention. That doesn't mean don't do those, but it just means that scientifically we're not able to put those on the same level as a tried and true and very rigorously studied treatment like ERP. And I'm excited that we do have these other approaches. They overlap a lot. All of these treatments have lots of overlaps. They're all cognitive behavioral therapies. But I'm excited to see more research on some of these other approaches and ways that we can draw from them all, because it shouldn't be a turf war that this treatment is better than the other. It's more about how can we use what we've learned about OCD to help the next person who comes into the office to help them get better.
Absolutely. And I know we're running out of time, so this will be short, but exactly like what we said about medication, we're all different people. Biologically, we're all different. We also all think differently. ERP does work. It works for me. It works for lots of other people, but it doesn't work for every single person with OCD, or every single person with OCD doesn't feel really connected to that kind of treatment, which is why people are researching other types of treatment, and there are some out there. So I think that was a great busted myth to end with. And now we have a couple closing remarks. So the first thing is that OCD Week is here. Like I said, kind of the theme, there's a lot of myth busting, truths about OCD. So the IOCDF is offering daily programming to celebrate OCD Awareness Week, including live streams, Zoom events, and Instagram lives. So if you want to check out that full calendar or register for any of the events, just go to iocdf.org/OCD Week. The online OCD conference registration is now open. You can visit iocdf.org/online OCDcon to register. This year's online OCD conference will feature 2 days of virtual programming for the entire OCD and related disorders community. Walks are also taking place across the country. So if you want to see if there's a walk near you to participate in, then just go to iocdf.org/walk. I'm seeing a theme with these links. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the socials. This live stream is just one of many, so you can see the entire schedule of future streams at iocdf.org/live streams. And then last thing, you can also view recordings of past live streams, as well as watch our hosts answer your pre-submitted questions via the OCD mailbag on IOCDF's YouTube channel, youtube.com/IOCDF. And then remember to like and subscribe to get notified when our live streams are scheduled. That was a lot of IOCDF.
That's a lot of good stuff. And I just want to also remind folks that the IOCDF has kicked off fundraising for the research grant program, and 100% of donations received will support next year's research grant awards, funding studies that further our understanding of the causes and treatments of OCD and related disorders, which will help us bust even more myths. So go to iocdf.org/donate-research. Meg, this has been a blast. It's good to see you, and this was really fun.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. This was a great time.
Yeah, we missed Kyle, but he'll be back hopefully with us next month.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for tuning in.